All right, well, let's resume. And as we start, I realize I've been going on for those two previous classes, and we haven't had much of a chance for interaction and response. So I want to open it up to any questions and interaction. I'll start off by asking you guys a question. Have you had anybody in your conversations with you, have you experienced the concern that some people have expressed to you that the reason they don't believe or they're struggling with this idea of why God will allow suffering? Any of you had that experience? And if you have, tell me, give us a little bit of background to it. Speak loud so that our thing can pick it up. Yeah.
So, yeah, I met this guy online that we were chatting, and then I found out he calls himself an agnostic, like he believes in God, but he doesn't like the fact that God allows suffering and that people are going to go to hell.
Okay.
And I like the points he really brought up with how you responded to that.
Okay.
And yeah, I'm going to look back on it. But yeah, I kind of just said, it's not that he allows it. Well, yeah, he allows it, but I said, it's our fault that it's happening.
Okay. Good.
So I said we're sinful, and yeah, it's our choice whether to follow him or not. And everyone, pretty much, a lot of people have a chance to believe. It's whether they choose to, and it's not him saying, "Oh, you're not going to believe."
Right. Good.
I think I'm getting to it actually.
Good. Good.
Because, yeah, he moved recently, and yeah, I said I'm ready for him because he's had a lot of health issues and he had to quit his job. But yeah, he said his boss is praying for him too. So I've seen that people are actually that are there with him right now, planting his life. Which
Good.
yeah.
Are you still have contact with him?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so now you can follow up the conversation and maybe raise some of these points that
That's why I wanted to look back
Yeah.
at the slide because
Like-
that was a really good point.
I will, like I say, I'll put it on populate my notes for this, and any questions you want to go through it and kind of refresh yourself and then use it. So, but okay, thanks, Daniel. Anybody else have that experience in interactions with people in your circle of relationships? Okay, Grace, tell what has been your experience?
It was a while ago, I don't remember the whole dialogue, but I remember bringing up free will, how the Lord would just take our free will, and humans, we do things according to our own actions, and they affect everyone around us,
Okay.
and sometimes we can't control them.
Okay, good. Yeah, and that's one of the key discussions in the whole area of suffering, is you have to bring in the concept of free will, because a lot of people, they simply raise the problem, but they haven't thought through the implications. Like why doesn't God stop it? Well, then, if you follow it to a logical conclusion, as I said, where does God stop stopping it? At a certain point, He turns it into a robotic universe, which would not be fun to live in. I think you'd agree. But anybody else have that experience? John, I saw you nodding.
Yeah, no, I've definitely. I think I've, in my response, I think I've been pretty washy on that. Like, I think I've been quick to like, I don't know, but I know how to deal with that as a Christian. So I'm not necessarily giving a sufficient answer for like why he does.
Okay.
But jumping quickly to my understanding of Scripture and knowing kind of how I can cope with that and how I can like grow in that, like you were talking to. So, I mean, that's, I guess, influences that answer. But yeah, I haven't really been too firm on that.
All right. So hopefully this will give you some resources.
Yeah.
I really like this idea of turning the tables on the person and asking, when you start off by asking them, say, okay, then what is your answer to the problem of suffering? Because they all automatically put you on the defensive, and now you're turning around and saying, okay, so what is your reason for it? And really, if you exclude God, it's almost like capricious. It just happens, nothing you can do. And so when you turn it then into pointing out, as I did with the young fellow on the plane, this idea of the fact that God is redeeming it and causing good to come, it gives me a sense of hope. And an ability to cope with it. That's what I was challenging this fellow with. We were doing this chatting back and forth on after my sermon there about Jesus being a historical person. That was the point I was trying to make to him. How do you respond? What would you do, Daniel?
Yeah, I wanted to say something about that earlier, but like I
Go
really
ahead.
liked how your response at the end was saying, "I'm still bringing people comfort, even if it's a lie."
Yeah.
And it's like in their point of view, comfort is what everyone like strives for.
Mm-hmm.
And just see your response there. Perfectly. I really like how you worded it.
Yeah, exactly. You see, and that's exactly the point because.
Pascal's wager is what I usually go to.
Okay. Yes. Tell us. We'll come back to you, Nicole. Tell us. Quote Pascal's wager.
So Pascal's wager is so it's you're gonna live your whole life like how you said you live the life of comfort knowing and believing God and just he brings you peace and even if it's a lie you still live. What are you gonna lose in the end? If it's what other people believe like it's just blackness. What did you lose in the end?
Exactly.
It's peace and belief in something even if it wasn't there you still have peace and
Yeah. It's a win-win situation for us.
exactly.
Good point. Okay, Nicole.
Wouldn't that argument like only work with people who don't believe in like religion and things like that? But I feel like other religions technically could probably use that same argument.
They could. They could. If it's within their system, within our system, we have the verse, God causes all things to work together for good. All right? And we also have, the fact that God desires worship. And so it would depend. For example, within Islam, it wouldn't work because they believe in fatalism. Allah wills it. So they could never... yeah, and so it'd be much more difficult for them. Buddhism perhaps might be because it's suffering is you want to get rid of suffering, so it could be within Buddhism possible. Daniel?
I'll just make a comment on that. I looked into a bunch of like other religions. No other religion has like an assurance of your salvation. Is what I looked into. Everyone is either you do enough good works or you get reincarnated as something else and you have to go through again until you reach nirvana, which is Hinduism.
That's Hinduism, yeah.
Yeah. And I've noticed that Christianity is the only one that Jesus died for you, and there is a way to be assured of your salvation if you believe. And Muslims actually, even if they do enough good works, Allah can always say no. And
They're always hoping.
It's hope. It's all based
Although, in all fairness to Muslims, wouldn't they think that a suicide bomber aren't they guaranteed
there's that one.
paradise?
Jihad is what it is. If you die, I've described it as like a martyr.
Right. That's what they call it, martyr.
Yeah. That's the only way to, I'd say, be assured in.
That's right. They do guarantee 72 virgins for you when you come when you give your life as a martyr. Suicide bomber. So that's why a lot of them do it. But can you imagine the shock when you wake up a moment later in hell after being a suicide bomber, and you realize you've been led astray? Wow.
It's just that extremism.
Wow. Emma.
I don't find that have an underhanded approach maybe it's not the best way.
Okay, so
But
why do you say underhanded approach?
yeah.
Okay, explain yourself.
I never use my testimony or like my good ability, and I'm like, well, there's no point to my cerebral palsy then, and they don't like that. at
Okay,
all.
yes, because you can appeal to the cerebral palsy. Palsy is having a God-defined purpose in your life.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just you got the bad hand dealt to you,
Yeah.
right? Whereas you have hope that God is going to work through your cerebral palsy to accomplish His purposes, whatever those are for you, and that even for you, cerebral palsy will cause ultimate good.
Yeah.
Because there's more to life than just here and now, there's eternity. And you will be totally healed in eternity.
Yeah.
Good point. Right on. Good point. John!
This is just kind of a general question going back to the beginning of the lesson, talking about the fall.
Okay.
And so I was just reminded of so you talked about God giving us free will so that, and Adam and Eve having free will.
Right.
And he chose, which I totally understand.
Okay.
How would you talk about, in Ephesians 1, it talks about being like the Father choosing us in him for the foundation of the world, and how that's like reconciliation in Christ, there's redemption, there's God's understanding of the fall and purposing things to happen post-fall, before the fall. How do you talk about that? This is, I know I don't want to open a can of worms.
No, that's
but
good.
how do you talk about God's allowance of Adam and Eve to do that thing while also understanding that that was purposed in a sense?
Yeah. Really, what you're dealing with is a conundrum between free will and predestination, right?
Yeah.
The whole battle between Calvinism and Arminianism, right?
Yeah, I can't help but go there in that.
Right.
in
Okay,
that,
and
you
it's
know.
it's well worth going through. How I cope with it, and I think I alluded to it in a previous class, but I'll go through it again. In my analysis, and I talked about this last time, when you deal outside of time, you enter into eternity. Okay, and so the word predestination suggests before, right? So when you enter into eternity, there is no pre. So somehow, and it's an impossible thing for me to grasp in time, what it must be like to be outside of time, and for God to have foreknowledge and free will. And so when people ask me, do you believe in Calvinism or Arminianism, I say yes. In other words, both are true. It's not either or. And the problem is not with the concept, the problem is with my inability to grasp that concept.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I don't know any other way to, because if it isn't that way, then the Bible contradicts itself. Because one time it says whosoever will, and the next time it says he chose us from the beginning of the world. Well, it's not whosoever will, it's either one or the other.
Yeah.
And so it has to be both and.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think the reason I can say it's both and is because I look at time and entering eternity. Now, it's a little bit of a cop-out, but it's still a better answer than nothing at all.
Yeah. Yeah, it feels like in that there, because it, at the same time that it is foreknowledge, it's like he acts, like he does that.
Yeah. Well,
know,
no man can come to the Father except, no man can come to me except the Father draw him.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so now you've got that statement, which is quite exclusive to free will.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And whosoever will may come. So you have the two communicated throughout, and so my response is that you have to look at it outside of time for that to make sense.
Yeah.
Okay, no, Nicole had her hand, and then over to Dan.
So did God put himself in time when he created the earth?
I can't see that. To me, my analysis would be that God existed outside of time, and time was part of his creation of the whole world. And when he planned the world to be, he planned for there to be such a thing as time, past, present, and future. And so when he made the whole of reality that we experience, that was part of it. But I believe he exists outside of that. And in eternity, time does not exist. That's how I look at it. And
Right now.
pardon me?
But like right now.
Right now, in the moment you die, you enter into eternity. Time ceases to exist. And how that operates, you remember I used the illustration of a child, a little girl in her mother's womb, thinking, what's it going to be like? I've never breathed before, you know? She's sloshing around in there. And it's the same thing for us. How can you imagine what it's like? But you'll know 1 second after you die. Daniel.
Yeah, I like Billy Graham saying, how
Okay?
which he meant started praying that God would help him grasp what he was reading.
Yeah.
And instead of trying to, he just said, God guide me, kind of, instead of trying to guide himself.
Right.
And yeah, some of the things, there's no way we can understand it.
Yeah,
And,
exactly. I use the word imponderable. It's impossible to grasp. And the problem with a finite mind, and I use the illustration of two things, going into a spaceship and moving into space. Where do you get to the end of space? And when you get there, what does it look like? Is it a big wall?
that's the thing.
You can go on ad infinitum. Same thing with time. When you consider it from our perspective, those are infinite concepts, and it's the problem. The problem is not with the concept; it's with the inability of the mind to grasp it. Let me give you another illustration. I've used this a lot of times when I'm witnessing to people. Right now, besides my voice, there are millions of voices in this room. I'm not talking about spiritual. I'm talking about technological. If you get the right receiver, you can pick up those voices. You have a radio, you'll hear it. You have a TV, you'll hear those voices, right? They're in the air, okay? And so that reality is not the problem. The voices are there. It's the fact that my brain can't hear those, but that this computer can. It'll pick them up. And the same thing when it comes to these concepts, the triune nature of God. I used that as an illustration before. An infinite concept trying to understand by a finite mind is impossible. The problem is not with the concept, it's not the voices out there, it's the problem with the reception, not able to do it. This guy can do it, this guy can't. Now, I can hear you're saying, this can't hear you talking as well. You can turn it around the other way. Okay. Actually, it's listening to me right now because it's taping, but you get my point. All right. Well, there's philosophical issues that relate to this. I hope this you'll be helped, and we'll leave it at that. I'm going to go to hard question number 2. So we're going to set aside the PowerPoint, and I'm going to deal with the second hard question. The first one was, why does God love long-suffering? The second hard question is, what about those who've never heard the gospel? And I've had a lot of people ask me the question, and Christians and non-Christians, well, if you believe this, what about those who don't hear about this? You go to Africa and people have never heard about God. Are they going to hell? And this concern has been raised by people. They've heard me say that the only way you get to heaven is through believing in Jesus. Indeed, Bible says this. John 14:6, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. And we're going to talk about the exclusivistic claims of Christ in one of the other obstacles later on. We might get into that this afternoon. The fact that Jesus said he was the only way. Acts 4:12, salvation is found in no one else, for there is no other name given under heaven, given among men, whereby we must be saved. No other name. And so, again, a very exclusivistic claim, very unpopular in our society that values and appreciates diversity. And we'll look at that later on. Romans 10:17, consequently, faith comes from hearing. I should be getting you guys to be reading this. Okay, well, next point. I'll read it now. Consequently, faith comes from hearing the message, and the message is heard through the word of Christ. So here's the dilemma that people see. If the only way you get to heaven is through Jesus, and if people are living in a place in the world where they've never heard of Jesus, what about them? What happens to them? Do they go to hell? And is it fair for God to condemn people to hell if they never knew in the first place what they had to do to avoid going to hell, i.e. accepting Jesus? So that's the problem. How do you handle that situation? People in Timbuktu, as a matter of fact, you know where Timbuktu is? You ever heard Timbuktu? It's actually a place. Do you know where it is, Timbuktu? No, it's in Mali.
My in-laws have been there.
They have in Mali?
Brought back a bottle of water for us from there.
Yeah. I spoke in Timbuktu, in Mali at a missionary conference, and somebody said, well, do you know, and somehow you used the word Timbuktu, and they said, that's, yeah, just down the road here. I was in Bamako in Mali, and it's in Timbuktu. So how does somebody in Timbuktu who never hears of Jesus, wherever in the world, what about them? That's the question. Now when people ask this question, yes, Emma?
Can I just say that the verse in the Bible that God too much will be expected, and then the little
Whom much is given, much will be expected. Whom little is given, little will be expected.
yeah,
Yes. God judges us according to knowledge.
yeah.
That's right. And we will, that will be one of the answers we will be looking at in part of it. You're sharp in picking that up. All right. Moving on. My experience has been this, and I'll throw this in as we get into this problem. Some people, when they ask that question, there's an ulterior motive for them. And that is their motivation, they don't want to necessarily get an answer, but rather it's asked as a diversion. It's kind of like sometimes people call this a smoke screen, or the red herring across the path is another word that we use that. When you're witnessing to people and we tell people they need to receive Christ, for some of them, when you start talking about their relationship with God, it makes them uncomfortable because they know some kind of change is implicit in my life. I have to acknowledge this and essentially reject this, and it introduces discomfort. And so they try, sometimes people will ask you this question, not because they want to know about it, but it's a way of them getting away from us focusing on this issue by creating a problem which they think is unsolvable. That's the reason they'll do that. And if it's unsolvable, then in their thinking, well, then I don't have to be concerned about answering the question concerning their accepting Christ. So it's kind of like a attempt at diversion. But in fairness, for a lot of people, it's a really legitimate question. I think for some people, it's driven by real concern. They want to know about the nature of God. And if God is really all-loving, as we are claiming is, and the fact that he appears to condemn people to a Christless eternity simply because they haven't met the expectations, but they never could meet those expectations, then he is unjust. And good-minded people, will struggle this. So when you are trying to be a witness, you want to be able to answer that kind of question. And I really recommend, that's why I'm spending quite a bit of time dealing with these hard questions, because I think you want to remove any stumbling block to people responding to Christ. And I've selected these, as I said, to deal with initially. And so we go ahead, and I don't encourage ignoring those, but because sometimes it gives people the impression we as Christians don't care, though we don't have a good answer. So, to counter that first type of response, for those who ask it as a diversion, a lot of times I quoted C.S. Lewis's statement. Listen to what Lewis says about this. Here's another thing that used to puzzle me. Is it not frightfully unfair that this new life should be confined to people who have heard of Christ and been able to believe in him? And then he goes on to say, but the truth is, God has not told us what his arrangements about other people are. And so the way that Lewis is saying here is, the fact of the matter is, you can read the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, and it won't tell you what happens to those who've never heard. That's his argument. I might beg to differ with that, as you'll see the rest of my presentation a little bit, but I can see his argument where he's coming from. Be that as it may, and I've sometimes suggested to people this as an answer if I don't want to get into any deeper, but I will get deeper for you guys. He does go on and say this: we do know that no man can be saved except through Christ. We do not know that only those who know him can be saved through him. And then he goes on to say, here's the application, but in the meantime, if you are worried about the people outside, the most unreasonable thing you can do is to remain outside yourself. Christians are Christ's body, the organism through which he works, and in addition to that body that enables, every addition to that body enables him to do more. If you want to help those outside, you must add your little cell to the body of Christ, who alone can help them. Cutting off a man's finger would be an odd way of getting him to do more work. And that comes out of mere Christianity. So what he's saying here is to people who say what about these people? And he's saying, well, we don't know what's going to happen with those people, but don't use that as an excuse to justify your own unbelief, because you do know. Okay? And it may work for the pygmy in Africa, but it's not going to work for you because you already do know. And the smokescreen is ineffective for you. And so that's the argument that he makes. The whole area of this being concept, I think we want to get to the fact is the justice of God. That's what really people struggle with. Is God just in sending people to hell? And that's what they want to look at, the justice of God. Isaiah 30:18. Okay, we're going to start going. Let's see. Jolie, would you read Isaiah 30:18 and then Hebrews 6:10, John? I think Emma had you read already, so move on. Okay, Isaiah 30:18, Jolie, and then Hebrews 6:10, John. Actually, Jolie, if you or Emma, if you can remember where that verse is, I think it's Luke 10. To whom much is given, much is required. You know the one you were alluding to? You don't know where it is? Can you find it? You got? Do you have a word search on your computer, on your phone? Find it. To whom much is given, much is required.
Luke 12:48.
Okay, found it. Luke 12:48. Okay. So Emma, we'll give you time to find it. Jolie, would you read Isaiah 30:18?
Therefore the Lord waits to be gracious to you, and therefore he exalts himself to show mercy to you. The Lord is a God of justice. Blessed are all those who wait for him.
For the Lord is a God of justice. Blessed are all those who wait on him. So that's the concept, that the justice of God. God is just, okay? So that's a basic premise we accept. Another verse that talks about that, Hebrews 6:10, John?
For God is not unjust so as to overlook your work and the love that you have shown for his name in serving the saints, as you still do.
And so what he's talking about here in the case of the statement here in the Hebrews, he's saying the justice of God is seen in the fact that when you give to God in service and accomplish his purposes, he will reward you, he will bless you, because you have done these things and keep on doing them. So what that means is that we can have confidence that God's judgment of these people will be fair. That's one confidence that will be fair. Okay, Emma, have you found the verse?
Yes.
All right, read it for us, please.
But the one who did not know and has been deserving punishment will be given to feel for. So everyone who has been given much will be demanded. And from the one who has been entrusted with much more will be asked.
All right. So there you have that idea that according to what the information you have, then God will judge you. Judgment is always based on knowledge and the opportunity that you have. All right. So now I want to get into the fact that I would suggest to you, John.
I was gonna just, because I really liked what you said earlier about flipping the tables.
Okay.
For this one, isn't this kind of the wrong question?
All right. Tell me why you say that.
Because when God saves anyone, it's his mercy.
Okay.
So if God was to actually, if people are arguing, oh, we should all deserve, like everyone deserves, they wouldn't say it like that. But why wouldn't these people be saved if they never heard about Jesus? Well, none of us deserved it anyways. So it's only an exercise of God's mercy if anyone was to be saved.
I oftentimes tell people that
Thank you.
if we were to get what we deserve, we'd all be in hell. So it's simply by the grace of God and the mercy of God that we get to go to heaven.
Yeah.
So that is the presupposition which everybody is judged. Dan.
So this is just going to transfer, I think this is transferring also to aborted babies. They never had the chance, so
That's a good point, yes. And we talked about that last time, about your name being blotted out of the book of life. And that I've always taken that to understand from the moment of conception, everyone has their name written in the book of life. And if by the time you reach the age of understanding and you make that choice and choose not to, then it's blotted out.
Yeah, I've always heard like written in it, so yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it is written. When is it written? When you're born. So that's the way I take it. Now I know a lot of people don't take it that way, and that's yes, Grace.
He also says like he knows our names before like we were born, so could we be written in when we were like conceived? Because what happens
Well,
when like miscarriages?
And again, you're bringing eternity into time, eh?
Yeah.
I mean that's the whole issue. Obviously, God stands outside of time, and when you're omniscient and know everything there is to know, I mean, what can you not know? Obviously. So, anytime when you try to understand what God does in God's nature, you always have to wrestle with the reality of this is almost impossible for me to figure out. It really is, because, and if I could understand, I said this last week, if I could understand God, frankly, I'd be disappointed. I really would. To think this little puny little skull with my cranium that contains, the gray matter in my head is able to figure out the God of the universe? Like, wow. Nicole.
So, maybe this will sound stupid.
No, it doesn't sound stupid. No comments are stupid.
For the rapture, then would the people, so wait, if it's not born, it's not saved? You're saying? If it's not a human until it's born?
No, I said from moment of conception.
The conception. So would on rapture, would the baby just disappear?
And the mother not?
Yeah.
Do you know what? After the rapture happens, I'll come with the answer back to you.
Okay.
We'll talk about it. We'll talk about it in heaven, okay?
But if you believe in life before being born, and every Christian should but then it would be like that. But God cares for all people.
Right. And even in the womb, that person is already existing in the womb. Right. And because the conception brings a new person into existence, then they are in the book of life because they're living. Okay? And that was God's initial plan for everybody to have a relationship with Him. And it's like my choice determines whether or not I accept that or not. And that's why I always, the choice is always ours to make in that regard. All right, so I want to move on to the first reason why I think the Bible says people do know He exists. And we're going to look at a verse in Romans chapter 1. So let's go to Romans chapter 1, verses 19 and 20. Now in Romans chapter 1, it's interesting what the Apostle Paul is dealing with in his concept. He's talking about the fact of his being involved in ministry in the first part of it. And verse 16, he says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God for the salvation of everyone who believes. First to the Jew. The Jews, of course, were God's chosen people, and it's through them that the covenant was brought in. And then to the Gentiles, under the new covenant, the Gentiles who were grafted in. And then it goes on to say, for in the gospel a righteousness from God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith from the first to last, just as it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 4. Actually, this verse is the one that Martin Luther read and became a born-again Christian. The just shall live by faith. The righteous shall live by faith. And then he goes on to say, yeah, Daniel?
Yeah, I just read Romans. I can wait until after.
Say what? Go ahead.
I just read Romans 1:19. I was going to make a comment on it.
Go ahead. Make the comment now, because...
I used this verse before when I was talking about
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I was listening to a Billy Graham sermon. He said everyone believes in God. It's just obvious.
Mhm.
Like even the atheists, they just you haven't met an atheist that's faced any real trouble yet, is what he said. But that was like belief in Jesus, and that was the argument that someone came back at me with, and I was like, yeah, that's true. It's belief through him. So yeah.
Okay,
Explain.
I'll explain that.
Yeah.
I'll explain that. I'll get to that. All right. So then, verse 18: the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the ungodliness, all the godlessness, and wickedness of men who suppress the truth by their wickedness. Now, notice there he talks about God's wrath, God's anger against people who suppress. So the word suppress suggests what?
A knowledge.
Mm-hmm, a knowledge, and then you push it away. Okay, and that's the way he's going in this argument. And the reason they suppress it is because he says in verse 19, since what may be known about God is plain to them. And now he's talking about here against all the godlessness and wickedness of men who suppress the truth. So he's talking about people. What may be known about God is plain to them because God has made it plain to them. So in other words, what his suggestion is, everybody knows there is a God. Everybody knows about God. And then he gives a reason why he's saying that. For since the creation of the world, so you go right back to the beginning, God's invisible qualities, and he lists two of those, his eternal power and divine nature, who he is, have been what? What is the next word? In NIV it uses the words clearly seen. Anybody got a different translation? Does it use it?
It's just clearly perceived.
Clearly perceived. Anything else? About the same. So, I mean, you can't get any plainer than that. Clearly seen, being understood, the nature of God being understood. How? From what has been made. So what he's talking about when he says what has been made? Look around yourself. Look around. Creation, so that all men are without excuse. In other words, nobody can say, I didn't know there was a God. Why? Because the reality is that the whole creation tells us about God, and everybody is aware, except perhaps those who are mentally challenged to the degree they're not. And of course, in that case, the state of innocence kicks in, as it does with children prior to the age of understanding. But everybody else who's cognizant of the world around about them, they know there is a God because they look at the world around about them. Psalm 19, 1 and 2. Let's see. Were you going to ask a question, Emma?
Yes.
Okay.
What do you do with when Jesus says, you are my disciple, and then when he comes into his glory, and then he says, God, when do we see you hungry and naked? For the believers that have believed in the faith as family, but they fell away, will they enter into God's?
So you're talking about the loss of salvation? Can people lose their salvation? Is that what you're really asking? When people believe and then turn away from Him? That's what you're concerned about? All right. Can you lose your salvation? Okay, we're getting all the heavy questions here. My response to that is, if a person is truly born again of the Spirit of God and is truly saved, you cannot lose your salvation. You can enter into a state which we call backsliding. You can live have sin in your life, for which when you die, you will enter into eternity, being judged by God. Everyone shall receive that according, it says that we will all be judged at the judgment seat of Christ to receive that which we've done in our body, whether it be good or bad. So, truly born again people. But when I watch people, and as being a pastor for all these years, I've seen hundreds of people come into the church, even get baptized, the rest of that, and down the road, they have nothing to do with it. So, will they be in heaven or not? I don't know. When I talk to them and they've walked away, they don't come to church, I'll say to them, and if I'm talking to them, I'll say, I know you've made this profession of faith, but if you were to die tonight, I can't assure you'd go to heaven, because if you were truly a child of God, you'd live with it this way. So the question is, why are you not? And so I don't want to give people a false sense of assurance. Yeah, you're okay. You accepted Christ at a Billy Graham crusade when you were 5 years old. I never give people a false sense of assurance, because they may end up, as a result of thinking, yeah, I'm okay, dying and going to hell. I don't want to give them a false sense of assurance. So I tell them, from my perspective, I look at the way you live, my judgment call is you're not a Christian. Now, you may be, but I wouldn't count on it. And if you really are a child of God, why are you living this way? If you are a child of God, you should be walking in fellowship with Him. And if you're not walking in fellowship, is it because you are a professor but not a possessor? And that's the difference in that regard. So that's a quick answer to the can you lose your salvation. I do not believe you can lose your salvation. And here's the reason why I do not believe you can lose your salvation. Because if you can lose your salvation, that means the converse has to be true. What's the converse to losing your salvation? You can earn it. All right? Can I earn my salvation? Well, if I can lose my salvation, then I earn it by keeping on doing what I should be doing, meaning I don't earn it initially, but I earn it by keeping on. And the answer is salvation is entirely by grace through faith. You don't do anything to deserve it. It's a free gift. So when I see a person not walking with the Lord, I don't automatically assume you made a profession that you're automatically in. You can say you are. And Jesus gave the parable of the 4 soils, and 2 out of those 4 soils were people who never really were truly believers. They had the initial evidence of it, but only the ones that carried it to fruitfulness really were true believers. And that's why I always tell people, check yourself out. That's why it says in Hebrews chapter 2 Corinthians 13 verse 5, examine yourselves to see whether you are in the faith. Check yourself out. It's always good. Make sure that your relationship with God is there. All right, so back to our thing here. Psalm 19, 1 and 2. Okay, who read last? Jolie? Did I ask you? Who did I ask to read that? Who was last?
Jolie and John.
I think I read last.
Okay, Daniel. 19, 1 and 2.
The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims His handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge.
So what Paul is saying here in Romans 1, since what may be known about God is plain to them because God has made it plain to them, what He has made it plain to them is through His creative handiwork. And that's why in Psalm 19 he says, the heavens declare the glory of God. Now here's the way that works. Right now we can see in the heavens the sun. The sun goes down, you'll see the sun, moon, you see the moon and the stars and the planets out in the sky. You can see the trees, you can see the grass, and all that has been created around us. And it says all of these things bring glory to God. So the question is, how do they bring glory to God? And the answer is that when you look at these things, the automatic human response is to ask yourself the question, where did it come from? Who made it? Because we know from nothing comes nothing. So therefore, cause has to be addressed. We call this cause and effect. So, for example, let's start with an effect. You hear crash out there. That's an effect. Then you ask yourself, who's out there? What made the noise? Cause. Cause and effect. So you have an effect, a world. How did it get here? What happened? Did it just come from nothing? No, science of evolution would suggest you it came from nothing. Daniel.
Yeah, it's like they say the Big Bang Theory came from like dust and stuff. But where
Where did the dust come from?
They never explain that.
That's right. They always start with something, but if it's really was nothing, and all of a sudden there was something. Where did the something come from out of nothing? All of you know in physics, matter can neither be, first law of thermodynamics, matter can neither be created or destroyed. It's always there. It's there, in whatever form it takes. So what you have here is this kind of cause and effect. We never think of an uncaused cause. You never hear the noise out there and think, oh, nothing caused it. You think something caused it. Oh, we operate that way. I hear the cars going by. I don't think, well, there's nothing out there. I hear the noise of the cars, and I think, well, there's cars out there. You get that's the argument of cause and effect. And so, evolution actually is not a cause, it's a process. Okay? It's a process. It can't be a cause because it is, first of all, unthinking, impersonal, based on chance, and we know chance creates nothing. Actually, I better not go in there. I'll talk about chance. Everything chance creates, it also destroys. When you're dealing with evolution. If you take a box of alphabets, can you still get that kind of cereal, alphabet cereal? A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Right. So you get the box of alphabet cereal, and you shake it out. So if I shake the box of alphabet cereal into my bowl, and before I put the milk into it, I take a look, and I've shaken it, and it spells my name, Henry. And I think, wow, this is great. Could that happen? Very low chance, but it could. You could get Henry happen. But the very moment I scoop that up, put it back in the box, shake it again, will it spell Henry Ozerny? What chance creates, it also destroys.
My dad uses a watch analogy for that. You like take apart a watch, put it in the bag, shake it up, and the watch is back together.
That's right. Yeah, same idea. Chance creates nothing. The same chance of this world being, somebody said, coming into existence the way it is and operating as perfectly is the same thing like an explosion in a print shop producing the Encyclopedia Britannica. It can't happen. It doesn't happen. Anyways, so Romans 1:20 is saying that this knowledge of God that everybody has comes from seeing the world that has been created. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen. Okay, what caused that noise? A truck, right? There you have caused by something. Nothing caused that noise. It did. And so this knowledge of God, according to Romans 1, is enough to render us without excuse when we stand before God at Judgment Day, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without cause. Now, I remember I used to read this verse, and I remember struggling with it over the years, and I thought the argument that people know of God's existence because they see nature around them, and through the process, wondering how everything came about, they conclude it couldn't have just happened, but that it had to be created by a God great enough to do so. And I thought, well, what if a person can't see the world around about them? What if they're blind? Yeah, it's okay. I have eyes, so I can see the sun, I can see the moon and the stars, I can see the trees, I can see the grass. What about a person who's blind?
You really is blindness
Well, if we're going by your cause analogy, then they always wonder what's going on.
Okay, to that degree. That's exactly the answer we're going. And let me give you how God answered this question for me. I came across a book written by a lady by the name of Anne Sullivan. And Anne Sullivan told of her experience of being a teacher for a young girl by the name of Helen Keller. Any of you ever heard of Helen Keller? Helen Keller was the one that was born deaf and blind and mute. And Anne Sullivan took Helen and taught her to communicate. Do you remember how she did it? How did she teach her to communicate? What process she used with her deaf? She wrote in her palm of her hand using the sense of feeling. And she taught her the alphabet. And she wrote in the palm of her hand. And it's a fascinating book, in Anne Sullivan's autobiography. And she said one day, and after she learned to communicate with Anne, and she was Anne's teacher for many years, she said one day, I thought, and Anne was a believer, a Christian, and she said, I'm going to tell her about God. And so she said, she began explaining that. Do you know what Helen said? So that's who he is. So that's who he is. Interesting, eh? She was aware of him, she just didn't know who. So that's who he is. I always knew he was there, I just did not know his name. So Helen intuitively knew of God's existence. She simply needed the details explained to her. Perfect illustration for that point. Secondly, people know about God and that He exists because they have this intuitive knowledge of God being there. And this is the second reason. They have this knowledge deep down inside of them. We've looked about the truth of God is known to them. That is all people. Instinctively, God has put this knowledge in the heart. The Message paraphrase puts it this way. The basic reality of God is plain enough. Open your eyes and there it is. By taking a long and thoughtful look at what God has created, people have always been able to see what their eyes as such can't see. Eternal power, for instance, and the mystery of His divine being, so that no one has a good excuse. So now I'm going to talk about this in the sense of what we call the anthropological argument for the existence of God. And this argument talks about the fact that there is a universal belief in some sort of God. In Paul Little's other book, you have the one I read, How to Give Away Your Faith, in his book called Know Why You Believe, he writes, and I quote, "Recent anthropological research has indicated that amongst the farthest and most remote primitive peoples today, there is a universal belief in God. In the earliest histories and legends of people all around the world, the original concept was of one God who's the creator." Back when I was in Winnipeg Bible College, it was called then as Providence College now, and I was working on my Bachelor of Theology degree. One of the courses I took there was sociology. And the textbook was written by two men by the name of Broom and Selznick, and they wrote in that textbook, and I remember we took it in sociology in class, and the quote wrote this: "Religious beliefs and practices exist in every known society, from the most simple and isolated to the most complex and urbane. Not all individuals are religious, but some form of religious behavior is found in all human communities." It was Karl Marx, who was the founder of Marxism and the communist doctrine, said man is incurably religious. And he also had another statement. He used to say, religion is the opiate of the people. It really used to frustrate Marx because he was a thoroughgoing atheist, and it bothered him that after years and years of communism, people still believed in the existence of God. And in Russia, where communism was mandated and everybody had to believe that, it bugged him no end because people were still believing in God. And so he said, religion is the opium of the people. Somebody said in the 21st century, it's actually the other way around. Opium is the religion of the people. Anyways, Amol Rajan writes, and I quote, "Karl Marx concluded that religion is the opium of the people. Look at your teenager this evening, glued to social media. Better still, look at yourself, twitching as if you don't have your smartphone in hand. What is stored in there amidst circuitry, data, addictive material, and astonishing engineering, if not the opium of the people?" So they're saying the opium of the people now is social media. Anyways, this presence of a God awareness in the human heart and the responding instinct to worship is universal. Wherever you go, you will find people who are worshipers of something. People worship. What they worship varies, but they have this divine sense, I need to worship. And someone has put it this way: no invention of man could have elicited such a universal response. I want you to turn to Acts 17 now, and I'm going to turn to the story of the Apostle Paul in the book of Acts, Acts 17, where he goes to the city of Athens. So, Acts 17:16. Acts 17:16. While Paul was waiting for them, he's talking about Silas and Timothy, who were still left in Berea. While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. I did a little bit of background study on this, and they said a writer by the name of Petronius was visiting Athens in the 1st century, and they said he was startled to find the number of gods in the city. He later on, Petronius went to say, it's easier to find a god in Athens than it is to find a man. They say that Athens in the day of Paul, when Paul wrote the city full of Athens population was 10,000, and they said they had 30,000 gods or idols. And it was interesting. Someone has put it this way: idolatry has a built-in inflation factor. And what they mean by that, they say, is once that people reject God, who the Bible, even though the three omnis about the nature of God, omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient, all-knowing, omnipresent everywhere at the same time, and omnipotent, all-powerful, all of these three aspects of God, they said, if you reject that kind of God, they turn to idolatry. Somebody said people don't walk away from God and believe nothing, they turn and believe something else. Because the very nature to believe in something greater than ourselves is part of our being, the very nature of who we are. And this person said, then they discover to their frustration that it takes an infinite number of lesser deities to fill the true God's shoes. That's why within Hinduism you have hundreds and thousands of gods, because once you deny the omniscient, all-powerful, all everywhere present God, then you have to fill it up with multiple deities to do the same job that we have it done in one God. And so Paul observes this, and he launches an offensive, and he begins teaching. And let's go to verse 17. It says, so he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace day by day with those who happened to be there. And so he goes on and he meets with some Epicurean and Stoic philosophers. A group, verse 18, of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to dispute with him. And some asked, what is this babbler trying to say? Actually, this word babbler in the original Greek has the idea of somebody who picks up scraps along the way. And goes on to say, others remarked he seems to be advocating foreign gods. And the reason for this, it goes on to say, they said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. Why would they use the plural when it talks about Jesus and the resurrection? Gods, foreign gods, when he's talking about Jesus and the resurrection, because Paul's talking about one God. Do you know why they say that? It's because in Greek, the name Jesus is Jesus. Anybody? No, I guess none of you are taking Greek here. It's being taught while we're doing this better course. Jesus is Jesus, and resurrection is Anastasia. It's a very common girl's name to this day, Anastasia. If he said Jesus and Anastasia, Jesus and the resurrection, they would have taken it as a male deity and a female deity. Like Asherah is a female deity in the Old Testament. So that's how they would see him. That they said that he is talking about foreign gods. So it says, they took him and brought him to the meeting of the Areopagus, where they said to him, may we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? For you are bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we know what they mean. Verse 21, all the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there spent their time doing nothing but talking about and listening to the latest ideas. So that was kind of the way they were spending their life. And so Paul then goes on to say, in verse 22, then Paul stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, men of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I found an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. To the unknown God. Now, apparently, here's the background to that. This is the research I've done on it, and it's a plausible one. In the year 600 BC, they had a pandemic hit Athens, and they said it was just raging. Of course, as we've had with coronavirus, it's very transmissible, and so people were dying all over the city of Athens. And so the Cretan poet, that is, Paul quotes in Titus chapter 1, Epimenides, came over with a plan. And what he did, he said, let's bring in a flock of black and white sheep and let them through the city from the Areopagus. And here's what the plan was. Wherever each lay down, it was sacrificed. And Epimenides' plan was to give any god concerned in the matter a chance to reveal his willingness to help by causing the sheep that pleased him to lie down to rest as a sign he would accept those sheep if they were offered in sacrifice. A number of sheep rested, and the Athenians offered them in sacrifice upon unnamed altars built especially for the purpose, and apparently the plagues lifted from the city. Diogenes Laertius stated later, quote, that altars may be found in different parts of Attica, the name of Athens, with no name inscribed upon them, which are memorials to this atonement. And the engraving was agnosto theo. And agnosto is the word don't know, unknown God, from which you get an agnostic. And so what Paul then says, now what you worship is something unknown, I am going to proclaim to you. And so what he's saying, you guys all worship. Now let me tell you what to worship. You already believe in God. And I believe in eating lots of food. And thank you, Jordan, for bringing it. So we break for lunch. Or should we fast and pray?
Yeah, I can eat food. Depends what's for lunch.
If the food is good, we'll be can resume. And according to the clock, it says 1:30, so we'll get going. And before the lunch break, we were talking about Paul's experience on Mars Hill. And we're dealing with the whole issue of the people having an intuitive knowledge of God, and particularly this inbred, inborn, inbuilt need to worship some God somehow, somewhere. And as Paul is in Athens and he sees this altar to the unknown God, agnosto theo, he then makes this comment about them. He says, and we just kind of concluded with this before lunchtime, now what you worship as something unknown, in other words, that intuitive sense to worship that you've got, he goes on to say, I am going to proclaim to you. In other words, that God-given instinct to worship, now I'm going to clarify exactly who and what you should be worshiping. And he goes on to identify it this way, verse 24. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in temples made by human hands. So what you're having here is Paul's argument that you begin by looking at the world and everything that's in it, and this idea of worship, you do it in your spirit, not through an idol. And he says, and he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything, because he himself gives all men life and breath and everything else. For from one man he made every nation of men, and he determined the time set for them and the exact places they should live. And then notice the next verse. And God did this so that men would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from each of us. So you get this idea that it's God puts within those people this idea of a desire to worship, and it should lead them to the one true God. And he goes on to say, for in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own prophets have said, we are his offspring. Therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like a gold or silver or stone, an image made by man's design and skill. In other words, the true God is not identified by a physical being, such as an idol, but in the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands people everywhere to repent. For he set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. And then notice he introduces this man. He goes on to say about him, he has given proof to this, all men, by raising him from the dead. And when they heard about the resurrection from the dead, some of them sneered. In other words, they rejected the idea of the possibility of a person coming back to life. But others said, we want to hear you again on this subject. And at that, Paul left the council, and a few men became followers of Paul and believed. And among them was Dionysius, a member of the Areopagus. So one of the very court became a follower, as well as a woman named Damaris and a number of others. So you have here, Paul's making the appeal to the Athenians that your worshiping and that intuitive desire to worship should point you to the God who is there. Now, there is enormous evidence to indicate that originally mankind believed in one God. And I want to give you 3 illustrations of this. And this is some of the research that Christian sociologists and anthropologists have done. For example, in his book Eternity in Their Hearts, Don Richardson tells about the Incas, and all of you perhaps heard about the about the Incas down in South America. And they had a king by the name of Pachacuti, and He was the founder of the Inca Empire, 1438 to 1471. And Richardson says how the Incas used to deify the sun. They worshiped the sun. And they built an amazing temple to the sun called Cori Cancha. And they dedicated it to the sun god whom they called Inti. And they, like temples typically all around the world, they adorned it with gold. And worship of the sun has been a very integral part of many peoples all over the world. It's because obviously they recognize the good that the sun makes for us, the source of good. And it's been a worship of many people. And the Incas worshiped the sun, and they called him Inti. Now, it's interesting, Ezekiel talks about sun worship in his day. Let's see, Daniel, would you read Ezekiel 14 to 16, please? Ezekiel 14 through 16. No, 8, 14 to 16.
Then he brought me to the entrance of the north gate of the house of the Lord, and behold, there sat a woman weeping for Tammuz. Then he said to me, have you seen this, O son of man? You will see still greater abominations than these. And he brought me into the inner court of the house of the Lord, and behold, at the entrance of the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar, were about 25 men with their backs to the temple of the Lord, with their faces toward the east, worshiping the sun toward the east.
Now, this is a vision that Ezekiel has. God shows him. Now, Ezekiel's in captivity in Babylon, and God takes him through the Spirit and takes him back to Jerusalem. But at this point in time, Ezekiel was already in captivity, but Babylon had not yet destroyed the city of Jerusalem. They destroyed the city of Jerusalem in 586 BC. So, Ezekiel had gone to Babylon in 597 BC. So in those 11 years, Ezekiel was already serving as a prophet for God in the city of Babylon. And God takes him by this vision to the house of the Lord, back to Jerusalem, to the temple there, Solomon's temple. And he sees, first of all, a group of women, and they're worshiping the female goddess Tammuz. And part of that was this whole idea of that you mourn for her and in the worship of Tammuz. And then the angel who's showing him this says, I'm going to show you something even worse. And then he goes into the very temple where God himself is to be worshipped. And there you have about 25 men right in the main part of the temple, and their backs are towards the temple. And the temple in Jerusalem, both Solomon's temple and the temples built by Zerubbabel and later on enhanced by Herod, all face to the east. And so you would come in from the east gate, come in. So the men were facing east with their backs to the temple proper, and they were, obviously it was morning, and they were worshiping the sun here. And it says, with their backs to the temple of the Lord and their faces towards the east, they were bowing down to the sun in the east. And of course, notice it says this is detestable. Well, the worship of the sun, as I said, was a very common thing, and that's what the Incas worshiped. And Pachacuti came to ultimately reject Inti, the worship of Inti the sun, and here was his reasoning. He said, and I quote, Inti cannot be universal if, while giving light to some, he withholds it from others. He cannot be perfect if he can never remain at ease resting. He can't be all-powerful when the smallest cloud covers him. And so Pachacuti used that kind of the dilemma, the problem, and he said, if Inti is not the true God, then who is he? And then he said he remembered his father. His father's name was Hatan Tupac. And his father, Hatan Tupac, had talked about Viracocha, the omnipotent, I should say rather, creator of all things. And he had a dream. His dad had a dream. And he met in his dream Viracocha as the creator of all things. Now, this dream of Viracocha, that had been amongst the Incas right from day one, right from antiquity. And they said really in the recent while they had only switched from the worship of Viracocha towards the worship of Inti the sun. And as a result of remembering that dream and what his dad had told him, he concluded that God, whom he called in his Inca language Viracocha, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Viracocha, and he said he is the source of all good, not the sun. And so what Pachacuti did was then he called a Congress of the Priests of the Sun, and he told them, Inti is not the one true God, but Viracocha is. And he said, he gave this description of Viracocha. He is ancient, remote, supreme, and unrevealed, nor does he need the gross satisfaction of a consort. He notice the wording here, he manifests himself as a trinity whenever he wishes. This is almost divine revelation. God is opening his mind to understand his very nature. Otherwise, only heavenly warriors and archangels surround his loneliness. He created all peoples by his word as well as all spirits. He is man's fortunes, ordaining his years and nourishing him. He is the very principle of life, for he warms the folks through his created son, Panchayo, the sun. He is a bringer of peace and order. He is in his own being blessed and has pity on men's wretchedness. He alone judges and absolves them and enables them to combat their evil tendencies. And in Eternity in Their Hearts, Don Richardson says there's a classic illustration of a people who have known the worship of God, moved away from it, and then wanting to know the true God, God reveals himself. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on, about that. But before I get into that, I want to give two more illustrations of this. The Santal people of India. It was in the year 1867. Two men by the name of Lars Skefsrud and Hans Borisson, they were, I think, from Norway or Sweden, went to India as missionaries, and they worked amongst a group of about 2.5 million people in northern India, north of Calcutta, called Santal, S-A-N-T-A-L. And they learned the language of the Santal and found to their amazement that the people immediately responded to their preaching. And the people began saying things like this to Skefsrud and Borisson. Thackus Jew has not forgotten about us after all this time. Now, the name Thackus Jew was the name they had given for what they would call God. And Skefsrud asked how they knew about Thakur Jew. How did you find out about him? And the Santal replied, they said, our forefathers knew him long ago. And they said that when Skefsrud started preaching God as Thakuf Jew, and that they could be reconciled to him through Jesus Christ, he said thousands of the Santal were saved. And he said he was baptizing up to 80 people a day. And during his years in India, they said he saw a total of 15,000 baptisms. And in the decades following, another 85,000 or more were baptized. They said today, in this part of India, there are 200,000 Santal Christians. And that all started with this belief in their forefathers had in Thakur Jew, that there is this supreme sovereign God. And then when they heard about Jesus, they followed it up with faith in him. And then the third illustration is the people in Ethiopia called as the Gdeo people. And they had a belief in Magano, of a benevolent being who is the omnipotent creator of everything. But they said few people amongst the Gdeo people prayed to Magano because more seemed to be concerned to appease an evil spirit that they called, you notice what they called this evil spirit? I'll spell it first and then pronounce it. S-H-E-I-T, and then they have an apostrophe, A-N. Now pronounce that. S-H-E-I-T-A-N. Shaitan. Very similar to Satan, eh? And they said this, a missionary asked them, a missionary by the name of Alfred Brand asked them, how come you regard Magano with profound awe yet you sacrifice to Shaitan. And they replied, we sacrifice to Shaitan not because we love him, but because we simply do not enjoy close enough ties with Magano to allow us to be done with Shaitan. Now, isn't that fascinating? And so it was back in the year 1940 that one of the Gadeo men, his name was Boasa Wangi, had prayed and asked Magano to reveal himself to the Gadeos. And they said he got a speedy response. And they said God gave him a vision of two white-skinned strangers erecting flimsy shelters for themselves under the shade of a large sycamore tree near Dilla, Warasa's hometown. And then later they built, shiny roof structures that dotted the entire hillside. And the interesting thing was that all of the dwellings in Gadeo land at that point in time were grass roofed. And now he saw in this vision shiny roofed structures. And then it says, Warasa heard a voice. These men, these two white-skinned strangers, will bring you a message from Magano, the God you seek. Wait for them. And then in the final scene of his vision, he saw himself remove the center pole of his house, carry it out of town, and set it on the ground next to one of the shiny roof structures. Now they say that in Gadeo belief, the center pole of a man's house represented his life. And you see the symbolism there? And it was in December 1948 that Albert Brand and Glenn Kane, who were missionaries, who went to Ethiopia to begin the work amongst the Gadeo people. And they said Ethiopian officials did not allow them to go into the center of the Gadeo tribe as they had wished. So they asked and received permission to go to a town in the periphery called Dilla, which was the hometown of Warasa Wangi. When they came to Dilla, they set up a tent under an old sycamore tree, and the first person to see them was Warasa Wangi, just like he had seen in his vision. Back in his vision, he had seen, it says, a vision of two white-skinned strangers, which in Ethiopia is not common. I remember when I was in Ethiopia in 2006, my son Curtis and I were walking through the streets of Addis Ababa, and we were the center of attention. I'll tell you what, all those black faces, and then it's you. And so he sees in his vision erecting flimsy shelters for themselves under the shade of a large sycamore tree. And here, when Brand and Cain come, they set up a tent under the old sycamore tree, and the first person to see them, as I said, was Warasa Wangi. They say today there are more than 200 churches averaging over 200 members amongst the Gadeo people. So